welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode, with a difficult spring leading to challenging grazing conditions, I'm joined by Teagasc Grass Tin Manager John Maher to discuss tips in relation to managing grass. John, on farms where grazing grass has been delayed and very little grazing has taken place to date, what advice have you for these farmers?
Some people have, turned out a little bit later than normal. It has been quite a roller coaster of a year in terms of the spring that's come in 2021. We had a fairly wet February, especially in the south, and March was mixed with good spells and bad spells. So if we delayed turnout, there appears to be plenty of grass on farms in that scenario. So it's a matter of getting all the animals out as fast as you can to get control of grass. We're the middle of April. By the middle of May, the stemming of grass will be really into action, and it gives us about a month to get things right now. So I think that the most important thing we do is we get moving as fast as we can with as many animals as fast as we can. Ground conditions for the last 10 days have been quite dry, so a lot of ground has improved. I admit that the temperatures are lower than normal. But for people who are late turnout, it's a great chance to have got animals out, get moving, get grazing, and try and clean up the swards as fast as we can before stemming starts in the middle of May.
It has been a difficult spring, as you said, and normally most years we'd be starting into the second rotation. For farmers that are on target, what advice have you for them?
Yeah, so it's somewhat similar. There are a good proportion of farmers who are on dry stock farms who have been, fairly adventurous in terms of grass, have got out, got moving with small numbers of animals, especially lighter animals, I suppose. And they've got on quite well, but having the farm set up well set up in terms of infrastructure is important for that. And having the right attitude and flexibility in terms of grazing management is also important about the paddocks you pick, what grass you go into. So obviously, when the weather conditions were poor, you'd be in the drier fields with lower amounts of grass. And when the conditions are trickier, when the conditions are good, that you move into fields that are more awkward in infrastructure, maybe larger amounts of grass and more difficult to deal with, but take advantage of the dry weather. And we've had mixtures of dry spells and wet spells, and it's just a matter of making hay when the sun shines, I suppose. But for those farmers who have got out early, they may have run into difficult circumstances at times with wet spells, and maybe paddocks were undergrazed. And it comes back to the point I made earlier on with the later turnout group. We have about a month at best left to get the swards cleaned off before stemming really starts to a large extent. And this is a chance now to get the swards cleaned out. We've had very good grazing conditions and good ground conditions. Land has dried out enormously. So it's a chance to get out and get those paddocks that maybe were undergrazed earlier on for whatever reason, cleaned out. For those who started the second round, then they keep the momentum going. It's about holding a 21-day rotation. So we have the motto of growth in 3 weeks, kind of graze in 3 days. While growth at the early April hasn't been hectic, ground conditions have been good. So animals have got on quite well. We know the dry matter grass is quite high as well. It's up in 20% today now. So, it's a matter of keeping the momentum going. This brings us into the fertilizer camp as well. So with the first 2 weeks of April being a bit slower in growth, I think it's timely that we got some fertilizer out, and especially compound. Phosphorus is very important for spring growth, especially when conditions are a bit, limiting, or where ground conditions are difficult, or where temperatures are lower. Phosphorus is a good boost for grass growth. So the product we kind of like best would be products like 18612 plus sulphur. It's also timely for sulphur as well, especially on dry farms. And those compound fertilizers also help grass recovery, especially if they were damaged somewhat in February or March. So that's timely too, Catherine. 1 bag to the acre of that type of compound would do an awful lot for spring growth and recovery of grass.
That's great, John. And as you mentioned there, especially with silage ground going to be closed in the coming weeks, a lot of farms could be getting tight on grass. What can farmers do in that case?
Yeah, so obviously the fertilizer is one boost. People who applied slurry, there has been a good response to slurry this spring. To be honest, from what we see from the results from pasture base. So that supplies P and K, albeit in a different format than fertilizer. Fertilizer is more instant. The P and K from slurry is more medium term or longer haul release, but it is P and K going out, and to a degree some sulfur. So it's a matter of having the nutrient um, requirements of grass out, and I suppose the main two that matter at this point in time are nitrogen and phosphorus in whatever form. And then I suppose to be when grass is tight is that you maximize the growth of the sward, right? And obviously, if you have too much grass in the farm, that's a bit slower to recover, because it's white after grazing. Equally, if you have a very low amount of grass in the farm, then you've got to control the numbers a bit, and maybe you either keep some of the other stock that don't do as well at grass in the spring, or have a bigger impact on demand, in for a little bit a while longer. But the most important thing, I suppose, Catherine, is to maximize growth, is to keep the sward green. And green is where the growth is, green is where the leaf is, and that's where you maximize growth, along with your fertilizer application or slurry application. Yeah.
That's great, John. And as you said there, grow it in 3 weeks and graze it in 3 days. In relation to paddock size, it's a question that comes up year on year. What's the ideal paddock size for the coming weeks?
Yeah, so we don't want to spend too long in a paddock or a field. The idea of growing it in 3 weeks is the way the ryegrass sward grows. And one leaf appears after 7 or 8 days, then the next leaf appears, and then the third leaf appears. That's the way the ryegrass plant grows. When the fourth leaf appears, the first leaf dies, and then we have a reduction in quality, and we also get more stem. So this is why we try to keep it green, and this is why we try and keep it to the 2 to 3 leaf stage and avoid the fourth leaf happening. And that happens in the 21, 22, 23, 24, 5 day growth window. We try to graze in 3 days because then it allows the paddock time for recovery. If we spend a long time in paddocks, we grow less grass and recovery is slower. So this is why we target grow it in 21, 22, 23 days and graze it in 3 days.
And over the next few weeks, I suppose things can change very quick, and we can go from having a shortage of grass, which we may have on some farms at the moment, to grass getting out of control. What can farmers do to maintain control in the coming weeks?
Yeah, so this is all about really going into the right grass. If you go into grass that's too strong, recovery is poor. The animals spend too long grazing it. Regrowth is also poor. So it's really about going into the right grass. And we always talk about grass that's, for those with the numbers, about 1,500 in cover, or 10 centimeters high for those who do the plate meter. But that's the grass we talk about, 4 inches, 10 centimeters high. And that's where the grass is as ideal phase. It's the ideal phase for growth, it's the ideal phase for quality, and it's the ideal phase for recovery. And then above all, it's the ideal phase for the animal. That's where the animal is at happiest. We can graze the sward out well without affecting the performance of the animal. And then the recovery is fast and the quality of the recovery is high. So, if we underdo it, we grow less. If we overdo it, unfortunately, we grow a bit less as well, and the recovery is slower. We'll have lots of grass, but we will compromise in quality. So, it's a kind of a balanced situation, and this is why we always talk about growth in 3 weeks and grazes in 3 days. It's at the right phase for quality and for recovery.
And the Grass 10 team at the moment are busy providing the weekly newsletter and videos and webinars. How can farmers access all this information?
Yeah, so obviously we're in COVID restrictions. We can't be out in farm. There's Grass 10 courses there for people who want to join them and make better use of the grass on dry stock farms. Then to get over what we call the information deficit provided by COVID restrictions, we have a Grass 10 newsletter that goes out every month. And if you access the Grass 10 website on the Teagasc website, you will get the Grass 10 newsletter that's issued every week. And it has stories of dry stock farms, dairy farms, sheep farms, beef farms, on how they're getting on. And so some of those are linked into videos to tell the story by picture. They say a picture tells 1,000 words, and I suppose that's why why we can do podcasts and do written documents. Sometimes the videos are very, very handy. So they go out on social media via Pasture Base as well, which is another site that you can access grass material on, which is www.pbi.ie, or the Grass 10 website, which is through the Teagasc website, which is www.teagasc.ie/grass 10. So there's different ways of getting this information. There's newsletters, there's podcasts like yourself, Catherine, and then there's also videos released either through Pasture Base or Grass 10 that just give people guidance here on, grazing, a little bit on the management of animals, and also on the management of fertilizer and slurry, which is going to become more important in the years ahead, as we know.
Most definitely. And in the next month, what are the top 3 things that farmers need to be focusing on to maintain grass quality and utilise grass on their farms?
I leave it with 3 messages, Catherine. The first one is to have the nitrogen, P, K, and sulphur nutrient supply out, right? Now, that can have come through slurry earlier on in the season, which is fine, but places that didn't get slurry, you'd like to have a compound fertilizer supplying those nutrients, right? That's the first thing to keep grass moving. And there's a big demand for phosphorus, especially in the spring. And then we move into sulfur demand as we come into summer, and K a little bit later on. But all 3 are required on top of nitrogen. So that's the N, P, K, and sulfur story. The next piece then, Catherine, right, is to, the compound fertilizer will also help repair damaged paddocks as well. The next piece then is to we have, I suppose, a month before, at best now, before stemming really gets into its worst phase in the middle of May on. So in order to keep grass quality at its best, we must clean out the swards well for the next month, right? And there's often the temptation, to leave a little bit of grass behind, so to maximize animal performance. But that's, short-term gain, long-term pain. So the real message here is to clean the swards out well. Ground conditions have been excellent recently and look like being so for the next while. So, we capitalize on those ground conditions and get the swards cleaned out so that we maintain quality for the rest of the season, in which the bulk of the grass grows. Like, we're in the middle of April now, and 85% of the grass growth still has to come. So we have big grass growths in the end of April, all through May, June, and July. And it's important to have high quality swards to get to maximize the animal performance. And the third piece, Catherine, which we've touched on already, if we could, grow it in about 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, and graze in 3 days, we'll do the best for the grass plant. We'll do the best for the animal in terms of quality and the right phase of grass growing. And we do the best for the farmer's pocket.
That's great, John. Thanks very much, and great advice for farmers managing grass at the moment and in the coming weeks.
Thanks very much.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to John for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.